Tuning in today and for joining us for this talk, which is being hosted by Artcite Inc. My name is Ron Su, and I'm the administrative assistant here for Artcite. And for those of you who may not be familiar, Artcite is an artist-run center in Windsor, Ontario, dedicated to showcasing contemporary art within the Windsor-Essex region. And we are very excited today to be continuing Option+Shift, which is our brand new series of online talks featuring digital artists and curators whose work showcase some of the diverse conversations and perspectives being explored through the digital media today. And through the series of talks, we are hoping to not only broaden our understanding of the digital medium, but also become exposed to different ways of working digitally, which has become even more important during our COVID reality. Digital media has become a way for us to bridge social distance gaps, continue working remotely, while still creating unique work through unconventional and experimental ways. And by talking about their respective practices, we hope that these speakers will help us to think even more expansively about what digital practices can look like today. So I'm very excited for our speaker this week, Shaheer Zazai. Thank you so much for being here, Shaheer. Shaheer is a Toronto-based Afghan-Canadian artist with a current studio practice, both in painting and digital media. His practice focuses on exploring and attempting to investigate the development of cultural identity in the present geopolitical climate and diaspora. His digital works revolve around Microsoft Word and imagery drawn from traditional Afghan carpets. Through mimicking carpet making methods, Zazai creates his own designs in Microsoft Word, where every knot of a carpet is translated into a typed character. So thank you so much for being here. Before I go on any further, I would just like to read a land acknowledgement. So, we wish to express our gratitude and acknowledge that our work today takes place on traditional Indigenous territories across Ontario. Artcite is located on the traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy of First Nations, which includes the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi. And that through these online platforms, we are able to host conversations with guests across other cities, including Toronto, which is the ancestral traditional territories of the Ojibwe, the Anishinaabeg, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit. We would also like to recognize that an acknowledgement is just an acknowledgement and is not an act of reconciliation or decolonization in itself, and should really prompt us as settlers to think about our responsibilities to this land, as well as our relationships to Indigenous communities and groups who continue to face erasure, violence, and displacement from the legacy of colonialism, which we as settlers have benefited from. This includes those of us here at Artcite, as we continue to make steps towards making long-term changes towards more equitable programming, which includes making space for more Indigenous, Black, and intersectional perspectives. Thank you. And one last thing before I hand things over to Shaheer, I'd just like to quickly go over the format for today's talk, as well as some of the Zoom functions that we'll be using. So shortly, I'm going to hand things over to Shaheer for a bit to speak about his practice, and then we'll go into more of a discussion / Q&A. If you have any questions for Shaheer that come up during the talk, the really great thing about Zoom is that Zoom has a chat function that we can type out our questions, and then I can read them to Shaheer, which I'll be monitoring throughout the chat. I believe the chat button should be at the bottom of your Zoom window. You'll see a button that says chat. And if you click on that, that should open up a new text window where you can type your question in. If you have a question for Shaheer and you want to ask him yourself, Zoom also has something called the raise hand function, which we can use to unmute anybody who wants to speak to Shaheer. So basically at the bottom of your Zoom window, there should be a button that says participants. And when you open that tab, a new window to the side should open up with everybody's names in it. And at the bottom of that new window, you'll see a button that says raise hand. And what that will do when you click that button is that Zoom will notify me that your hand is raised, and then I can coordinate to unmute you so that you can speak directly to Shaheer. I've also written those instructions out in the chat in case anybody didn't catch those. Great. And Shaheer is also okay with us interrupting him at any point during the talk. So if you have a question that comes up for you at any point, please don't be shy. Feel free to ask your questions whenever they come up, and I'll direct them to Shaheer. So with that said, and without further ado, I'd like to pass things over to Shaheer.
Thank you, Ron. I hope everyone can hear me clearly. I am Shaheer. Feel free to interrupt, like Ron said. I'd rather have a conversation than to ramble on about myself. I hope you guys can see my screen. This is my mouse moving on it right now. I'll be running everything off of my website. It's all pretty easy to find instead of doing a PowerPoint. And that's the gist of it. As Ron introduced, I'm not going to go into the details of introducing myself. The practice that I'm sharing right now, I'm a painter as much as I'm a digital artist. This is me in my studio. That's my future painting that I'm going to paint one day. But the digital practice is what we're going to focus on. It's based in Microsoft Word as a medium. It didn't, the work has taken on the imagery of textiles, and that's the direction the work has taken itself. It didn't start from there. So my talk will be more in a timeline of where it started from and where it led to. When I started this project, the intention was not to make art even. It was purely me giving myself a task to do. It was January 1st, 2013. And this whole project is a product of giving myself a challenge to see whether I can beat it or not. And the challenge was to give myself 2013 dots and spaces to type. And it was a partial challenge, partial punishment, because we sit in front of our laptop so much. And January 1st, 2013, and a whole new year had begun, and I really didn't feel like much of an achievement. And I was literally sitting in front of my laptop. So the challenge was, now you're going to sit here and type 2013 dots and spaces, and you're not allowed to stop. So I literally did this and counted from 1 to 2013. It sounds like a lot. It really wasn't. It didn't feel like much of an achievement. So at that point, I gave myself, I basically assigned, so Microsoft Word has 15 colors, if I'm not wrong, in highlighters. That includes both black and white. So I assigned each one a numerical location on the page. By numerical location, I mean the third character will become red and the fourth one will become blue. And I started highlighting. And if you were to imagine it, repetition, numbers, and colors, all of it led, and on a grid led to forming textile looking patterns. And that snowballed to becoming my 7 years long practice now. So what you're looking at is my website, but I'll switch you over to this page. So what you're looking at here is the earliest works I made. So the 2013 dots and spaces originally look like this. So this is the original 2013 dots and spaces, but then highlighted based on the numerical location of each color. Yellow is the very first color on the list. So I basically put everything in the order as it shows on the highlighter. This also reminds me, I didn't think of this earlier, but when I first started this project, the pattern you'll notice is that I work based on rules and parameters that I set for myself or I set for the work, and that basically defines everything. This entire project is done as an improvisation when it comes to the process. Nothing is pre-planned in any way except for size, what the colors are gonna be, and that's about it. I'll explain as we go further. So what this image reminded me just now is that when I first started, I used to only take screenshots of the work and then I would delete the file just because I didn't want to give myself the option to edit anything. So that was me forcing myself to lose the ability of the digital easiness. Digital gives us a lot of comfort to be able to edit things, manipulate things whenever we want. And I wanted to take all that away from myself. So I used to delete the files. So everything here is files for which doesn't exist. They just exist in the form of screenshots now. So I experimented with it more and more. And there came a point where I really didn't want them to look like textiles just because my intention wasn't there to make textile-based work. And I also didn't want to be put in the bracket of artists making work based on his culture, even though that's exactly where I ended up at the end. But at the beginning, because it wasn't my intent, I didn't want to be seen as that. I didn't want the work to be read as that. But there's something about this process that mimics carpet weaving and knotting, specifically knotting, which is one of the carpet making techniques. It mimics it so directly that there was an unavoidable factor that that's what it wants to become. So I fought this for a while. I didn't want to make work that was cultural based. So, but I didn't stop making work. I continued making. I used to make one pretty much every day and post it, and people would respond to it. And the response was for me was very surprising because everyone really liked it. And I kept making it because people liked it. I made it. I enjoyed it, but I wasn't willing to show it as an art form. And that was purely because I didn't want to be a textile or cultural based artist. So here's a quick view of all the different transformations that has happened to it. It's taken many weird directions, like this one, for example. Again, for me, at the end of the day, I still read textiles in it. But then in 2015, this is 2 years of playing around and messing around with the medium. I saw a call for submission for a residency at OCAD for digital painting atelier is the residency is called. It's a week-long residency. And at that point, I decided that, you know what, I'm going to make a life-size carpet and I'm going to type it. And because 1 week means 40 hours of work in a job sense, I had to take a week off work. So the decision was, let's see what happens if I was to sit for 40 hours and type and highlight and what the outcome would be. And around this time, I learned another thing, and that was that carpet designs are based on garden designs. Garden designs have walls. All gardens have walls. All gardens have a central fountain that channels water to the rest of the plants that's in the garden. Keeping that in mind, I went into the residency. And again, there was no intent of, there's no pre-planning, there's no sketching. And that's mainly because I enjoyed that aspect of it. I enjoyed the unpredictability of it. And honestly, if I knew what the end outcome would be, I would have given up a long time ago, and this wouldn't have lasted this many years. But at this point, it's basically become every work is a new challenge to see what would happen next. And I guess at the end of the day with art, most of us do that. No matter how much you know what the end outcome might be, it's the process, it's the time, and it's, not to be cliche, it's the journey that really means a lot. So I went into this residency and I made this one, which is about 90 inches by 44 inches in actual size. Around this time, I also came across another problem. This entire project is a series of troubleshooting. The problem that I came across at that point is that Word allows you to make any page size you want. You could make a page size the size of a room, but it won't let you output it. It will only output what it recognizes as a printable area. So if it's anything outside printable area, it won't output it. So I was like, okay, what the hell? I'm about to start this residency and suddenly I can't do what I would like to do. So I tried to reach out to Microsoft. Microsoft's technicians would say, talk to Adobe because it's a PDF problem. Adobe would say, no, go talk to Microsoft. It's like when you're trying to ask your parents for permission and mom tells you to go ask dad and dad tells you to go ask mom. That's basically what they were doing to me. So I had to come up with my own solution. And my solution was just use multiple pages. If it's gonna, so I started making them out of 8.5 by 14, which is a legal size. And that's the biggest size I was aware of at the time. So I made them out of 8.5 by 14 pages and I would stitch them together after the fact. So recently I explained my process as, I don't know if the audience is familiar with the surrealist process of exquisite corpse. Exquisite corpse is basically you take a page, you fold it up, first person draws on the first page, they hide it and they just leave the ends dangling for the next person to continue from there. And so it's the idea of exquisite corpse plus playing Tetris with shapes and troubleshooting a page. So all the designs, all the shapes in a carpet or in a design are informed by each other. And it's once I place a shape, it's a matter of like, how much room am I left with on that page and what can I squeeze in there? And that's basically what I do till the whole thing is finished. Just like English, I start from the left and work my way to the right and then down the page. So I start from a corner, and the corner will have, I'll start with a border after I place the border. So technically right now, if I was to select an area, a page is about this much. So I'll start on the first page, and then I'll have to go on to the next page and count where each line and color continues, and then type that page and highlight it and then go to the next page. So a lot of math. So started with very big, and then I thought, you know what, I have to make them a bit more accessible. On my website, these ones look bigger, but these ones are much smaller. So I did a series of carpets, designs called carpets. At this point, I had accepted and come to terms with my medium that I can't force my medium to do something. I just have to be the medium for my medium. And that's where I started exploring further. So I made a series of carpets. So this is carpet number 1, made out of 9 legal size pages. So this is the first page. And if you were to break this up into 9 sections, that's basically what it is. This carpet number 2. And at this point, I also started playing with the idea of fringes. Carpets have fringes at the end. So I thought, can I make digital fringes? So started making these cutouts, which was another interesting thing to do in Word, because you can't erase a portion of the text. I also can't copy paste, because the whole thing is dependent on the number of characters on a page. So if a page is able to fit 100 characters, and that's the maximum, if I was to copy 2 characters and paste it somewhere, now I've got 102. So it spills onto a second page. So as a result, I can't copy paste sections of my design. And also to make a negative space or a space that just looks white or blank, I basically have to make the text white. And that's the only way for me to create a negative space. So I did a lot of these carpet series, and there's another pattern that I noticed at this point, is that I was making 7 of one type. No explanation. I have no explanation for it. I just noticed it. So after I did the first 7, for this I'd applied for an Ontario Arts Council grant and I got it. So I did the 7 and I did a series of paintings at the same time. Also my painting and digital practice literally happened simultaneously. I switched between the 2. So with each carpet, again, it was like a challenge. Let's see what happens. And at this point, it's almost like, will I run out of designs one day? There will come a point where it's like, oh, you're starting to repeat yourself. I guess that's the day this project is going to come to an end. For now, I'm safe. This was a fun experiment to do, trying to make a curve out of text. Honestly, I thought it would be very simple. It'd just be like 1, 2, 3, and then 4. And just if you follow that system, you should be able to make a curve. Not that simple. I had to draw a curve on my laptop screen, and then I had to follow it to make a curve. That's the only way I could do this. There was no other way around it. And so that's how I made the curve. And I think this is one of the densest designs. Another glitch that Word has, colors change tones at random. Again, there's no rhyme or reason for this. And it's what I would call a non-issue. because it doesn't affect anybody else in the world except for me. So Microsoft's not willing to respond to it. This gray color becomes one tone darker. This background bluish green changes tone. These are the two that have always given me trouble. And in instances like that, again, there's no simple solution. It's redo the entire thing. So there's a level of the medium forces me to do so much manual work, if I was to call it that I really enjoy that part of it. It's a bit sadistic, if that's what the word is for it, but it's fun at the same time. I always say it's like, I think artists pretty much thrive on challenges. And if they run out of challenges, the work will start becoming boring, or they might get bored themselves. I'm sure there's some artists in the audience. They might be able to agree with me. If you agree, type agree. And moving along, there we go. We've got first agreement. So at this point I started, okay, I made accessible size is what I was calling it, which was 25.5 by 42, which is relatively big if you were to compare it to an apartment size. And then I was like, you know what, this has to get even more accessible. So I started making smaller. And these are 11.5 by 14 is what I produced them out. So these are actually made out of individual pages, which made it a little less troublesome for me, quicker things to work with. But I started experimenting at this point. Also, to speak about the carpets, something else happened with the carpets. With this project, prior to this project, I'm from Afghanistan. I was born in Afghanistan, raised in Pakistan. We lived in Pakistan for 13 years. I think we moved around, we switched 6 different houses, and I think I've been to 4 different schools in those 13 years. So moving around is a very common thing. And then we moved to Canada one day. But in this time, before my digital project, in my painting practice, my perspective of home or home country was from a very, if I could call it anger or frustration or a detachment, it was from that side. And as a result, I would look at everything as like, we did things wrong, so much bad is happening, and then the media feeds you so much negative, so you amplify that further for yourself, and your whole lens becomes like media, war, politics, so much bad, more bad. And my paintings became about that, and I was painting about that. My focus was that every show I wanted to do was based on Afghanistan and the hardships and what patriarchy's done. What this work did, without me even realizing it, I somehow stopped thinking about all that negative. And I started thinking about, again, cliche, but I started thinking about the positive side of things. I got curious about what else is it about our country or about us, if we were to really call ourselves Afghans. What more is there? And what is there in the history and in the culture of it, which is something that war does very successfully. It erases culture, it erases history, and it pretty much is like a bulldozer wiping out, replacing it with new. And Afghanistan's new literally became very few things that people know about it. People know opium, they know terrorism, they know Taliban, hot topics. People know hot topics. But if anyone was to be asked about, what do you know about the cultural history of that country? There's not much anyone can tell you, but there's so much that's happened there. So all this led me to that, and it was almost like, bad analogy, but at deathbed, people start thinking about home and family and things that they're not close to. It was similar to that. It was almost like suddenly I was thinking about home in a very nostalgic, longing perspective. I wanted to return. A need for return had come about. honestly, I didn't realize this till much later. I'm saying this now, but when I was making this work, I had no idea. I was just a guy sitting in front of a computer, typing Microsoft Word, having fun. And that fun turned into experimenting further. So with these works, they're smaller works, and the aim was to create a split palette, almost like, you know, those chemical test strips. When you dip it in the chemical, half of it becomes a different color. That's what these were for me, basically. So I made a few of them. And at this point, specifically at this point with this one, up till this point, I avoided the color yellow, because yellow is the most generic highlighter color. And I've worked in enough offices that yellow's become like annoying as a highlighter color. So I avoided it and I didn't use it till I used it in here. And I was so surprised to see how well it plays into everything. So I expanded my palette, even though there's only 15 colors in there. I was only using like 4 at a time, if ever. So with here, it was like to see where the palette could go, continue experimenting. And as you can see, shapes started forming that I would have not done previously. Curves started coming about. Before this, it was quite geometric. Looks like we were missing an image. I played with, I thought maybe make something square. And here I really started playing with negative space, what I could do with just white text. And honestly, I was having a little too much fun here. This is one of the works that I have shown the least. I still am not sure how I feel about it. Something very strange about it, very ink blotty. Curious what a psychologist would think if they were to see this. Maybe I will officially be branded as crazy eventually. Experiment. This one was fun. At the same time, it was kind of like a torture. All I was doing, you know, those screensavers where they go bounce around the page and keeps doing that. That's what I was trying to mimic by typing 1 over 1 down, 1 over 1 down, 1 over 1 down, till I hit a wall. And then I would turn around and be like, 1 up, 1 right, 1 up, 1 right. And at some point, it started looking like the page is just going to become red. And I was hoping that it would connect back to its tail where it started. And it wouldn't. It just kept going. And I was like, oh my God, this is just going to be a red page. After hours of typing, I'm just going to end up with a red page. Thankfully, not what happened. This is the outcome. And at this point, I also started experimenting with font size. A carpet's value, a handmade carpet's value, is also related to how dense the design is, or how densely knit the knots are. So a carpet is made out of knots per square inch. My designs are made out of typed highlighted text per square inch. So the density of a design and how intricate it is and how tightly woven it is really ups the value. So to mimic that aspect of it, I started playing with font size. So this one is actually made out of a 7-point font size, in contrast to what we normally use is 12-point, and which is what I was using a lot previously, which is why it looks so detailed, but the detail is pretty much, it's more text on a page. Playing further with negative space. And I'm gonna speed it through. Oh, this is the strangest thing I've done. I wanted the Kingston Prize, which is a portraiture competition. It's meant to be for painters. I wanted to submit something for that. And at that point, I experimented with doing something representation. This is the only representational thing I've ever done. Surprisingly, so easy to get something accurate because it's a grid. It's the same concept of painting in a grid or drawing with a grid. I made a grid on a picture based on the number of characters on a page. And then I just transcribed. And the outcome was honestly easier than it looks. So this was another experiment. And that brings me to the last symmetrical work I made. Also, with all this speaking to symmetry and playing with perfection and working within a grid, another thing that it brought to light to me, and this happened in a conversation with somebody who was here for a studio visit, made me realize that because of all this moving countries, moving homes, and this idea of diaspora, it creates a state of mind where you're constantly on alert, and you're living in a state where you always have to be ready for the next change that's going to be imposed on you. It could be a change of home, could be a change of country. You never know what's going to happen. And we were talking, and the guy I was talking to, he happens to be from Afghanistan. I don't come across a lot of Afghans in the art community. So we were talking, and I could tell we both at some point were like nodded at something we were talking about in agreement. And it was surprising to see. I thought I was the only one. I don't remember as a child being a child. I feel like I've always been an adult. And I think that has everything to do with this state of being on alert, is that you always have to be ready for whatever's going to happen next. And I feel like that was seeping into my work. I was imposing the same rules and regulations onto my work. And I was making my works become, live by the same rules I was living. It's like live within these parameters, have to be perfect. There's no mistakes. I would go through every character at the end and make sure I couldn't find a single problem in it. And what I was making with this work, the mistake that kept happening again and again, which is not, I guess, a mistake, an error, is the glitch of the color changing on me. The background color kept changing tone on me because of how big this thing is. This is 74 by 44 inches. And originally the background color was that blue I was referring to earlier. And then I was like, I can't deal with this. It changed on me twice. And I had to redo all of it. I was like, okay, it just has to become a new color. So I went through the hassle of replacing the entire background color with gray. And after doing this, I think something switched, and it led to my next body of work, which was purely focused on, I am no longer gonna impose these rules. Mistakes happen, and that's just the reality of who we are. And it became a means of, I guess the message here is accept yourself for who you are. Errors are part of the beauty of things, and it's just accept it and include it. So became non-symmetry. Non-symmetry has become the theme of what I'm focused on now. I am forcing non-symmetry as much as the work asks me to get symmetrical. And I'm gonna skip this one. This one is just an homage to where the work started from. The aim was to keep a tempo and type. And all the patterns that you're seeing in there are my mistakes, because sometimes one finger does 2 taps instead of 1. So this was just fun. This is me having fun, as weird as that sounds. So became my non-symmetrical works. When I say I am including errors and mistakes and change in decisions, this area, which looks a different color, is because the text is white. This was originally just a blank area. And I changed the shape of what I was making, and I left the text white, and I like it now. And that's where I have reached in my career, I guess, in my practice. This is one of my favorite ones. Again, a square. This was for an auction. And I think this, no, it's not my latest work. This is my weirdest work, not my latest work. And this is the latest one I have made. Took me 2 months. Didn't think it's going to take that long. I guess this would be a good time to talk about COVID. This was done entirely during COVID in quarantine mode. And it's strange to think being stuck indoors has created such a longing for being outdoors that the entire world was suddenly outdoors. Everybody wanted to be outside. We became park people. We became camping people. When or normally somebody would be like, go outside, you'd be like, no, I'm comfortable on the couch. And we all wanted to be outside, which I guess has seeped into the work. And I started making flowers without really intending on making flowers. So this piece for me really is a COVID piece. It's a need for going outside. And I think that's the gist of the last 7 years of me typing and highlighting.
That was amazing. Wow. Thank you, Shaheer. That was really, really beautiful and really insightful.
Thanks.
Wow. So at this point, I'd like to move into more of an open Q&A and discussion. Do a quick time check. So we've got about like 20 minutes. Yeah. So, oh, we actually already have a question, but I'll just explain. If anybody has a question, feel free to type it out into the chat box, and then I can read that question out to Shaheer. But if you also want to ask your question directly to Shaheer, or if you'd like to speak to Shaheer, Zoom has something called the raise hand function that we can use to unmute you. So basically at the bottom of your Zoom window, there's a button that says participants. If you click on that button, a new tab should open up with everybody's name. And at the bottom of that new tab, you should see a button there that says raise hand. And when you raise your hand, Zoom will notify me that your hand is raised. And then I can coordinate to unmute you so that you can ask your question directly to Shaheer. Okay, but I'll start with our first question in the chat here.
So Jude, to your question, I don't know, can everyone see the chat?
Maybe I'll read it out first and then, yeah. So Shaheer, are your physical and digital paintings in conversation with each other or two separate practices? You had mentioned working at both simultaneously. Wondering if you could tell us more about that.
My digital and painting were completely separate things when I started. And now I feel like for me, they've become the same thing. Process-wise, they're the same. They're both improvised. Neither one of them are planned. They both have preset basic things like palette and size of the work. And then the rest is entirely an improvisation. They look very different. If you were to see it on my website, my paintings look entirely different from my digital practice, but the fluidity is very much the same. And they have both started having a weird dialogue with me in a very therapeutic way. My digital practice is almost doing a very long-term therapy on how I am in diaspora and who I see myself and where I see my identity transforming into. But my digital practice, my painting practice is very dear to me, not only because it's been around for much longer, but it's the most exciting of the two, in the sense that it happens in the moment and it happens over a very short time. So my paintings are generally a one sitting thing. And the build up to it is so much that when I make the work, it's like being a kid. Weird to say that. Paintings are me being a kid and digital is me being an adult dealing with my adult psychological problems. Yeah.
That's great. So we have another question here. You mentioned a couple times that you liked certain rigid boundaries, but also talked about eventually breaking out of them, embracing mistakes, rejecting symmetry. Do you feel another wave of that coming on? And what might that look or feel like?
I think I just entered that wave. I just finished some work which has not become public yet. But during that work, I think I broke a few more rules that I had set for myself. There was never I would never use text from one work into another work. It was always had to be new. Copy pasting, which I referred to, I have started experimenting with that. So there is a transformation happening. And I like that I can't tell when it's happening till it's happened. So I feel like I'm entering one, and we'll see where it goes. So if you want to know more about it, keep an eye out. It will be announced sometime mid-December, and the work will go up in January. And it will be in a public space, so you can easily see it.
Whoa, that's really exciting. That was like a nice tease to just
Yeah.
pop in there. So another question, also from Jude. Also, what are you usually typing in these works? Is it the same thing each time, or does it change? I guess I'm trying to ask if you ever include text, since Word, as in Microsoft Word, lends itself to that so well.
I have experimented with actual text. When I say text, I mean like words and letters like A to Z. But the thing that I ended up using the most, which is what majority of the work is made out of, they're mostly just characters like /, /, steric, tilde. But what I'm actually looking for is monospaced characters, meaning they occupy the same amount of space on a page for me to be able to keep a perfect grid. If you were to look at it from a textile perspective, the warp and the weft, the warp is the text and the weft is the color. So for me to make a perfect grid, it has to be that way. But as you can tell, I am becoming a bit more experimental. So who knows what's next there?
Great. I'm just going to ask this question because it tags on to the last one. What is an example of a monospace character?
So there's monospaced fonts that exist. I can't tell you which font because I can't remember it off the top of my head. But monospace character meaning if you were to use the letter A on the page and you were to use the letter I next to it, they don't take up the same amount of space on a page. So when you go to highlight it, one will be a wider highlight, the other would be a thinner highlight. So as a result, I use things that take up the same amount of space on a page. So a / and a / take up the same amount of space. What did I use in here? I think this one is just made out of dots, commas. So yeah, that's what I mean by monospace.
Very cool. So does the work change or finalize once it's printed?
Once it's finished, there is no changes, and the final stage is printing. Once printed, there is no going back. Pretty much once I've considered it finished, it becomes a PDF, from PDF to TIFF, TIFF to stitch together, and then there's no going back. I find mistakes often. With this work, actually, specifically, somebody pointed out that they found a red dot in an area where it didn't belong, and that was very exciting. It was just like, yes, somebody caught it. With this work, after, where did it go? Sorry, I lost it. This one. Somebody found a mistake in this after it being around for like over a year and being shown multiple times. And I've seen it multiple times, and I never noticed it till somebody pointed it out, and I was like, yes. Now I'm like literally looking for mistakes. So it's more likely somebody else will notice it than I will. So it's good to know we're humans.
Yeah, that's amazing. I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Something that I'm really drawn about the sort of journey of your practice, it's that it seems like you've really had to adapt to some changes throughout the progression of your work. I'm thinking specifically about your like initial hesitations about the digital. Could you, well, I wonder what kind of work did you originally envision yourself making as an artist? Like, what was your kind of like, this is the idea of work that I'm going to be making? And then what did that process of like, accepting that this is the work that I'm making look like for you? What did you sort of tell yourself that like, I'm okay with this being the work that I'm making now?
I think the transformation that happens to most artists eventually, if you allow yourself the time, that's the key. You graduate from school and you think you're an artist. that's where you start imagining the kind of work you'll make. So when I graduated, everything was big. I made 8-foot tall paintings. Everything had to be massive, and the aim was to go bigger and grander paintings. It's that romanticized idea of what you want to be as an artist, or what an artist is perceived to be, because you yourself are just perceiving what an artist is. And then over time, I think one of the most important things that's happened for me is to shed the weight of education, is to unlearn, is to free myself of the academic pressure, and recognizing why am I even doing this, and what is the relevance of it to me, before I start worrying about the relevance of it in the art world, or in the what it is for the audience. I think the audience will find their way, one way or the other. And another important thing that I learned is that you can't decide what the audience should experience, because you will make work and the world will receive it in their own way. Each person has their own life experience that they bring to the table, and that's how they respond to the work. So that whole thing of me not allowing the digital work to be visible, not wanting the textile work to be textile work, it was me imposing things on the work. And it was not just me imposing things on the work, I was imposing it to the audience as well. I was blocking an audience from experiencing something because of my personal problem. To really let go of all of that and to allow for the work to just be, I think was the biggest lesson of the last, I don't know how long I've been graduated for. I think I've been graduated for 10 years. Yeah. That's biggest lesson.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that lesson.
No problem.
They have saved us a couple of years.
Honestly, my biggest advice would be get as free as you can, mentally, medium-wise. If you graduate from painting, it doesn't mean you're going to be a painter. You can tell yourself that for a long time, and I did. And here I am making digital work, but now who knows, I might become a sculptor next.
Cool. So sort of along that vein as well, you also mentioned some hesitation around using your cultural background within your work. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about adapting to using that material, and sort of, I guess, the same sort of emotional and mental process to coming to accepting using that material. And I'll say this too, because it seems like discussions around like how to think about using culture today seems to be like even more precious. I know a lot of artists can relate to the tension between wanting to explore their own culture versus like feeling like they might be mining it for like visual material.
I think in my case, what happened was that culture seeped in over me choosing to use it, which might be a slight difference here. But I think what I've come to do is it's less about using, it became more about accepting that the audience's lens would be the lens that they would see me through. The audience will see my work as cultural work, regardless of how many times I've explained what the work actually is to me. The imagery has become cultural and has transformed out of it as well. But it's, at the end of the day, it's you have to be, it's good to know what you're doing. So if you are making cultural work and you're making work based on culture, it's good to be aware of it. And at that point, if you're going to continue, you will have every reason to continue if you're aware of you're doing that. Another thing for me was that if I'm making work that is being recognized as cultural, then I really should, you almost, without choosing it, you kind of get volunteered into becoming a representative of your culture. Then comes the question of what light are you putting your culture in? What stage are you putting them on? And if you're putting it on a pedestal, how are you presenting it? And what question and dialogue are you bringing to the table? So originally when I fought this whole thing was because I was looking around and I was seeing how easily, like you said, mined, that culture was literally being mined and was being used in every way anyone could possibly do it. So for me, that was very problematic. And I was not happy to see that that's what was happening to culture. So when my work started taking that angle, I was like, uh-oh, walk away, get out now before you are one of them. And today I don't really see myself as one of them because I'm quite conscious of what it does. And every opportunity I have, I make sure to clarify what it actually is and what it has done. It's less to speak about my culture, but to try and understand who I am in relation to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, beautiful. Kind of switching gears a little bit to the latest work that you made. In a previous conversation, you did mention that you were, because of COVID, you were sort of becoming more attracted to this flower-like imagery. And I thought that was really interesting because you also mentioned that the carpet designs are actually based off of garden design. So there seems to be this interesting link between like garden to carpet, carpet to digital, and then digital back into nature.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about your thoughts about the influence of nature or like the symbolism of nature.
I try to stay away from digging too deep. I try to stay away from researching. I try to stay away from looking up what the symbols could mean. But it's very exciting to see these parallels or these transformations happen, things seeping into each other. But at the end of the day, it's almost like a psychological study. What happens to us when we're put in confines? What happens to us when we're put under a certain limitation? Like, how do we respond as humans? And the flowers seeping in has almost, it has not only seeped in my digital work, it's also really heavily seeped into my paintings. And I'm enjoying it, but I also, I haven't fully formed my thought about it. It hasn't really become a concrete thing. But the latest thought about it for me is I think vulnerability is starting to come to the surface. It's something that we don't show, we don't allow, especially coming from a patriarchy drilled side of the world, male-centric, very much. In a male-centric world, you are a man, and anything else you try to be is not allowed. You're not allowed to be weak. Weakness is not allowed. You don't show it. You don't express it. You don't dare feel it. When you come from that heavy of a burden, vulnerability is the last thing you want on the surface. And I think that's where it's going. I think vulnerability is starting to bring itself to the surface. And I am very accepting of it now. And I'm curious where it goes.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to be, it seems to be yielding really beautiful results, and really seems really like freeing too.
Yeah.
Well, I'm curious then if like the digital medium allows you to somehow be more vulnerable, or if maybe painting is more vulnerable for you then.
I think the digital is subliminal. The painting is personal. If I was to put them into categories. But now that I've become conscious of it, I'm curious whether it will want to hide away. You know, it's just like a shy animal. You come across it in the wild. It may look at you and may want to hide away, but it is as curious about you as you are curious about it. So I feel like vulnerability might be that. It's a game of who gets who to come out into the world.
Yeah. So we have a hand raise here. So I'm just going to unmute somebody here to ask a question.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm wondering about this relationship in your process to sort of pushing limitations of the word application and of like digital medium period, and kind of, I guess, do you see yourself as like collaborating with Word, or sort of like rebelling against the conventions of like Word and like digital process to make your work?
There's a lot of unintentional factors here.
Mm-hmm.
There was no intention to rebel against it or use a medium against its norm. But to that, I would also say that it's a great lesson to keep yourself open, open to anything can happen. Who knew that me sitting and typing 2013 dots would lead me to me giving a talk through Zoom in Windsor? But that's literally what that has done. So be it Microsoft Word or anything, I guess that's the greatest advantage we have as artists, is that we're manipulators of mediums, of circumstances, of conditions. Anything can become an inspiration and become a medium to doing something weird about it, if not different. So I guess I chose Microsoft Word and it has stuck around. I've been asked this question before where it's like, you know, there's softwares that you can just program and it will generate things for you. Then my question to that is like, what are we supposed to do then? You know, what am I supposed to do with all my time?
Yeah, I'm interested in the sort of the meditative process, which is like, you know, no cutting and pasting, no.
I think it's become very meditative. I can, with painting, I need an isolated state of mind. With digital, I could be doing this on a plane. I could be doing it during a meeting. I could be sitting in a family gathering and doing it. And I've done it in all those cases. So with digital, it's become second nature, but there's something about repetition that is therapeutic. If you were to, it's the same like in meditation where there's a mantra and you chant it. And after a certain while, it could allow your brain to become relaxed enough. So the same goes for typing. If you were to type something on repeat, there will come a point after which it will become mindless.
It reminds me of the same process as craft and like textile work. Because that's interesting. I've thought of, you know, like visually the compare. It's like it's very clear that the connection is there visually, but the fact that there's such a connection there in terms of process as well is interesting.
Yeah, actually, I'm finding more and more. I'm currently trying to experiment to find a way to turn them into jacquard loom woven textiles, just because of jacquard loom's connection to computers, and one led to the other, and made me realize how much my work is actually meant to be done through a knotting process. You can't weave it. If you were to try and weave it, it becomes so complicated that it's not so easily translatable. But it really translates to knotting, which again, I didn't mean it, but Afghanistan's most common way of making carpets is the knotting process. But it's like the connections you don't make that could happen for you. But again, it comes down to keep yourself open. As soon as you try and force things onto something, it will resist. So the less you impose, the more branches could grow.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing to keep in mind as a digital artist too, is to not fall into that trap of like starting to follow the rules and the constraints of whatever kind of like program or medium that you're using.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to give us one last question, if anybody has any last questions.
I'm reading through the questions to see if there's one we missed. Amna had asked, when it comes to artist block, how might you get back on track? More trial and error and experimentation? Yep.
I'm so sorry I missed that question.
No, it's okay. I'm going through them to see. But yeah, more experimentation, giving yourself time. I think as soon as you, like, you can't force art. You can try it. It just becomes muddy. The more time you give yourself, whether it's different for everyone. Some people go for a walk and it does the job. Some people listen to music and it does the job. For me, I think one of the blessings of having two different practices that run simultaneously is that I'm able to switch back and forth between the two. So I think giving things breathing room is important.
Yeah, that's a brilliant way to end, or a brilliant thought that hopefully we'll all keep into the back of our brains going forward. Okay, unfortunately, we're out of time. I have like a million more questions to ask you, but I want to thank you so much for sharing your insights with us, sharing your practice, development. I think we all learned quite a lot, actually. And just a reminder to everybody that next Thursday, November 12th at 2 p.m., we'll be continuing our series of online talks, Option+Shift, with our next artist, Lorna Mills. And these talks will also be continuing on for the rest of the month of November. So we hope we'll see you again for one of them. And with that said, thank you, Shaheer, one more time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. And hopefully we'll see you again soon.